Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Lockdown Library with me, Asim Qureshi. Today, I'm going to talk about the topic of surveillance capitalism. So before I get onto the definition of surveillance capitalism, this is an extremely important topic that I think many of us are not really familiar with yet in terms of the depths to which this impacts on our lives on a daily basis. If you have a laptop, if you use the internet, if you have a smartphone, the reality is that you have actually become a product. So I'm hoping by the time that I present the 4 books that I'm going to be talking about today, we'll have a somewhat of a better idea about what the scope of the problem that I'm trying to highlight is. And, hopefully you'll pick up some of the books that, I'll be mentioning. So the quick definition that I want to present from Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, is that it is an economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. And that is just one definition. And what Shoshana Zuboff is basically saying is that we ourselves have become the product, that tech companies use the metadata from our lives as free raw material. That's how they view it. That whatever we're doing on the internet, they are permitted for free to use that information in order to better sell us products and make ourselves the products. So our behaviors, our practices. So I'm not going to start with Shoshana Zuboff's book yet, although for me it's probably the most important out of the 4 that I'm going to be, or the most in-depth, should I say. I'm going to start with Cathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Mass Destruction. Now, this was the first actually of the 4 books that I had read, and it was such a huge eye-opener for me. Because, Cathy O'Neill, she's somebody who worked in the private sector herself. So she saw how algorithms were being used by the private sector in order to manipulate and take advantage of people on a daily basis. So her big problem is with big data and algorithms. So all of this data that these companies extract from every single time we play a free game on the phone or every time we make a purchase on Amazon, how that is then used in order to produce even kind of more sophisticated ways of tracking us. But really, her main issue is in the book is to do with the way that maths and algorithms within systems are used in order to kind of predict risk, the way that they're used in order to weed out applications for individuals, and how all of this really harms people who are disadvantaged in many ways. So, for example, it's used in the economy to predict risk, housing prices, insurance. Now, when you then say, for example, use algorithms to make determinations about where Black communities live as opposed to white communities, and then those algorithms then feed into the cost of insurance, for example, then you can see how a algorithm can actually replicate racism. I was really surprised to see that O'Neill, she actually makes mention of St. George's Hospital, where my own brother actually studied medicine, and how they had started to use algorithms to weed out people with backgrounds from ethnic minority communities. So what's interesting about that, of course, is that it was an algorithm that was doing the job rather than a human being being racist. But of course, human beings are the ones that actually produce these algorithms in the first place. She also highlights how algorithms are used in what's known as pre-crime. So there was a whole tool in America called future dangerousness. And the idea of future dangerousness is that they could use algorithms to predict whether or not a prisoner or a detainee would go on to become a danger in the future if they were to be released. Now, the problem with this is that the scoring of the system was already prejudicial. So, for example, it took into account things that are a normal part of the cultural lives of people of color, and it pathologized them. So they were much more likely to get a score that would mean that they would not be released back into society. Now, future dangerousness was used in the past as well, before even algorithms, especially in the death penalty system. And what we see with these systems is that because the human beings who are involved, either in writing the algorithms or involved in the process of using metrics in order to make determinations, that often they come with an increased harm because there are already racially prejudiced views towards the people that they're assessing. So that's Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neil. The second book was a superb piece of scholarship by Dr. Safia Noble, Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. I mean, this is like, subhanAllah, it's really unbelievable piece of work. She, doesn't take anything for granted in the way that she's trying to understand how tech, and specifically algorithms within the tech industry, the way that they discriminate against, especially Black people on a daily basis. It's something that's mind-boggling. For example, if you just type in Black women into your internet browser, and I don't suggest anybody does this, what she found at that time that she was doing the research was that largely pornographic material around Black women was coming up as the first page of search items. The same didn't happen for white women at all. For example, when she would in Google type unprofessional hair, the hair that would, and she's got screenshots that she presents throughout the book, the hair that would be presented would be perfectly well-made Afro hair. Like it's it's unbelievable when you see that. You're looking at the images and you think, well, these men and women look perfectly professional in terms of the way that they've made their hair before they've left the home to go to work or whatever. But the way that it's presented is that, these are examples of what unprofessional hair is if you're going to come into the workplace. So the results that come, like mentioning with Cathy O'Neil's book, the results are based on algorithms that are written by people with already predefined views of the world. Now, they might not have been as something as simple as somebody sitting there saying, typing in into the coding. If somebody Googles unprofessional hair, then make sure that all these images of Black people come up. That's not what happens. What happens is the way that the algorithm is written and the way that the algorithm that interacts with the data that's being fed into it is based on the coding, the prejudicial views of the coders themselves. So the machine doesn't understand anything other than what it's taught to understand about the world. The machine can't understand anything more than that. And that's what makes it so scary, actually, because they say that within the tech world that an algorithm has less ability to be biased. But what if the algorithm takes your bias as an individual and upscales it at a level that is truly terrifying? And I think that's the issue here, that Dr. Safia Noble is so brilliantly highlighting, that what we end up with is this entire architecture of prejudice that actually then, for the person who before maybe been able to highlight the individual racist who was making a determination about their life, now has no ability to challenge because the entire architecture of the system has been constructed to be racially prejudiced against them. So the third book I want to go on to is this massive tome of a book. I mean, this is a real beast. I'm not even going to lie to you. It takes a while to get through. But it's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, The Fight for a Human Future at the New Frontier of Power by Shoshana Zuboff. I mean, for those of you who enjoy reading and have the time to read, I think this is necessary reading. You have to go through this book in detail Now, this is a new field, this idea of surveillance capitalism. So she provides actually about, I think, 7 or 8 different definitions what surveillance capitalism. But just to reiterate the definition that I felt really captured what she's describing here. She's describing a new economic order that claims human experience as free raw material for hidden commercial practices of extraction, prediction, and sales. What we have given up for the sake of a smart life, like in an E understanding of what smart means, is incalculable. So, for example, for those of you who use a system like Nest, Nest is a thermostat that will help you better kind of deal with the home heating environment in your house. It can help by understanding what your practices are, understanding what your relationship with the weather is, what the conditions outside are. It takes the weather into account. It's smart. It's connected to the internet. It knows what's going on with the weather outside and generally. And so by judging your practices in the way that you turn it up or turn it down, the way you use it from your phone, it can then better predict itself what your ideal temperature is throughout the day. So it comes to a stage where this thing is so smart that you don't even need to interact with it anymore. It will just constantly provide you with the ideal temperature for the house. So of course, this sounds like a wonderful thing. I mean, it's a great piece of tech, right? That it's giving us an easier life. But what Shoshana Zuboff calls this is a Faustian pact, a 21st century Faustian pact, that we have entered into this deal with the devil for the sake of making our lives a little bit easier. What Nest is really doing is that it's extracting our data. It's taking it and then it's selling it to other companies. It's selling it in order to better sell us products. And actually, it's worth it for it in the end. That data that extracts is one of the biggest commodities in the world right now, our metadata. And of course, this isn't just used in a commercial sense. It's also, like I've already mentioned before, the other books, used as part of predictive policing. So she writes about predictive policing. The government is using tech companies to build massive dossiers on people based on nothing more than their constitutionally protected speech. Another more prominent surveillance as a service company, Palantir, once touted by Bloomberg Businessweek as the war on terror's secret weapon, was found to be in secret collaboration with the New Orleans Police Department to test its predictive policing technology. Palantir's software not only identified gang members, but also traced people's ties to other gang members, outlined criminal histories, analyzed social media, and predicted the likelihood that individuals would commit violence or become a victim. I mean, this is scary stuff because, of course, the people who are writing this code will have their own ideas around what social media looks like. So, for example, if a young black person shares on social media NWA's F the police, then how will the system understand this person on a range of its kind of like dangerousness models? So you can begin to see why some of this stuff is so problematic. And what's interesting, of course, Shoshana Zuboff is talking about Palantir, and this becomes very real for us right now because Palantir is one of the companies that, at least here in the UK, the government is trying to enter into contracts to track what? Coronavirus. So you can see how architecture builds itself on top of one another with these private companies in order to do what? To extract our data and effectively make us into products for people who want to sell things or to be surveilled in many different ways. The final book that I want to finish up on is this one, Don't Be Evil, The Case Against Big Tech by Rana Foroohar. I think if you were going to read an easier version of Shoshana Zuboff's book, they don't do exactly the same thing because Rana Foroohar is looking at much more of an economic analysis. of surveillance capitalism. But I think if you find it difficult to get through kind of a large tome like Shoshana Zuboff's book, then definitely pick up Rana Furuha's book, because she does provide a very kind of journalistic account. So it's very well written of the problems with big tech and the ways in which they operate. And actually, she's got a really great anecdote at the very beginning of the book, which then carries on throughout. It's to do with her son racking up, I think, like a $900 bill in the App Store on the Apple App Store, because he's buying all of these kind of products as part of a free app that's a game, in order to get leveled up. So technically the game is free, but the in-app purchases within the game are like dopamine hits. So in order to proceed, in order to get more enjoyment out of the game, he has to keep on buying these things. And she shows how all of this is tied to a psychology within the field itself, that they have studied the way that human beings, that they interact with the tech, and the way in which that we can be maximized by providing inducements at certain points. So for example, with some games, you can't get to the next level unless you purchase a certain item that will kind of give you a level up in order to be able to defeat a boss or whatever the case might be. So there's constant ways that we are being manipulated by these apps, by these big tech companies, in order to purchase these. And it's not as simple as a case of, well, just exercise self-control. They have studied us very, very, very carefully to understand how we interact with this material. So she says, people are the product. It's a shift that is almost metaphysical, as we move from an economy based on the tangible to one based on the intangible. And I think that's so fascinating, because the whole idea within the fiqh mu'amalat of being able to interact with an intangible, the law of transactions within Islam, of being able to go into contracts with intangible assets, is something that's a very, very contentious area and very looked down upon and very frowned upon. So, when I think about this whole field as within the ethics of being a Muslim, I do worry about how we as Muslims sometimes maybe replicate some of the practices of surveillance capitalism as we seek to gain more followers to our causes, something that I think that all of us should be thinking more about. And when we think, when Rana Furuha tells us that 80% of wealth that is currently owned is by 10% of companies, and the vast majority of that 10% are big tech, then we really need to start thinking about what the system of surveillance capitalism is doing, how it's impacting us, and how it's maintaining a kind of neoliberal system, which really isn't for the benefit of all. So, I hope that you found that interesting. As always, I look forward to hearing your thoughts. And inshallah, I will see you again soon. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Islam 21C brings to you 20 brand new unique series from renowned and respected shuyukh from across the globe, with one mission: to bring Muslims together in an online congregation never seen before in history, and lift the spirit of this Ramadan to bring us closer to Allah more than ever.
Man is left with no way of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala other than by virtue of his names and his majestic attributes that he gave himself and gifted humanity with.
We want to raise our children in the most perfect way, and perfection belongs to Allah. If a person comes to you whose religion and character pleases you, then get your daughters married to him.
It's not going to be easy, but Allah never leaves you alone. That's the essence of what we can get from the Prophet's life.
It's my pleasure, it's my honor to introduce Quran recitation from the Imam Jazari Institute.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم Now just think with me about the verse where Allah says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُمْسِكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ أَن تَزُولَا.
We'll start off with an easy one for you, Sheikh, inshallah. Can I postpone Taraweeh until the last third of the night?
Yeah, so essentially the night prayer is offered after Salat al-Isha, and you have until Salat al-Fajr to offer that.
We're all linked together in this. And that's really what empathy is. I mean, empathy in Arabic is like ataf, atuf, to tilt towards, to move towards.
Conveying insults. You know, the Arabs had a saying, "Ma shatamak illa man ballagak." The one who insulted you is the one who conveyed the insult to you.
There can be no more greater relationship of a husband and a wife than the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija.
We don't just leave that piece of knowledge that we've received just there on the page.
This virus is a mercy for us Muslims, because the Prophet ﷺ, he told us in a hadith that when you're afflicted with something, it's an expiation of your sins.
Down to earth like gravity, imagine me trying to turn my dreams to reality.
Allah Jalla wa Ala mentioned those who come in the front. وَالسَّابِقُونَ السَّابِقُونَ. They are the most successful people.
How we can embed the love of the Quran in the hearts of the young generation.
Welcome to the online masjid. Sign up now for your personal access to 300 plus free on-demand video content.